there are disciplines, and I'm thinking specifically in the social sciences, that actually define themselves partly in terms of a social, what they call a social justice mission.
Right.
And so I've talked to, actually, I just had this conversation yesterday with a former department head of a combined anthropology and sociology department. And he told me that at the heart of their mission, both the sociologists and the anthropologists, they see part of what they do as social justice.
Wow.
Now, that to me basically entails that at some level one is not entirely engaging one's subject matter in a critical fashion, right?
Yeah.
And so I wonder if there is a sort of a public perception maybe that filters out that some of these disciplines really are disguised advocacy
Yeah.
operations
Yeah.
rather than dispassionate critical
Yeah.
subjects.
Now that you're absolutely right, and of course the situation is even more marked in the case of a number of studies programs. This is going to sound very politically incorrect, and so I'm sure I'm going to get hate mail. But it's actually very obvious. I mean, people in those programs often do explain things the way you just did. That is, they see themselves as, for instance, into advocacy for gay and lesbians, or advocacy for African Americans, or advocacy for minorities in general, or whatever it is, gender issues, women issues, and so on and so forth. Now, I don't think there is anything wrong about an academic engaging in advocacy. As you know, that's what I do on a regular basis, but I don't do it in class.
That's right.
I do think there is something fundamentally wrong. In fact, it's a betrayal of higher education to engage in political advocacy, explicit political advocacy in a classroom. And I know some of my colleagues disagree, and that's too bad. I'm pretty clear in my own mind on that line. I mean, for instance, let me give you an example. I'm an atheist. I never ever advocate for atheism in class. Never. Even when it is an obviously easy thing to do. For instance, this semester I'm teaching an introductory philosophy class, and we're going to have discussions about God and arguments against or in favor of the existence of God, and then the relationship between morality and God. We'll talk about the Uti dilemma and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you that I do my best to present the arguments, period, and to explain the arguments, to argue one way and the other. They know what I think. Again, because even if I don't tell them, all they need to do is to go to my blog or read one of my books, and then they'll know exactly what I think. But no, it's not going to come across in the course of my lectures because it should not. It ought not, I think.
Yeah, and so I do think that to a certain extent, the liberals in the academy have brought this scrutiny on themselves. Because of this explosion of advocacy studies, so to speak, and also because there are even some traditional disciplines that define themselves this way. I mean, hasn't this been a criticism of anthropology going all the way back to Margaret Mead?
Yes, it has.
That it's not really straightforwardly neutral science, and so I think I don't want to give too much credence to that criticism, but I do think it's not. I think it's not entirely baseless.
You're right, and to be fair, one needs to acknowledge it. And I'm talking as a liberal and so on and so forth, right?
Me too. Yeah.
You're right. In fact, anthropology is you're absolutely correct. It's the sort of the quintessential example. And in fact, this was a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. I think there was a major split on that ground between cultural and physical anthropologists. Where the physical anthropologists see themselves explicitly as scientists, and therefore, regardless of their own opinions and their awareness of the fact that there are issues with indigenous populations and so on and so forth. I mean, those are issues that need to be considered in doing research. I mean, there is an issue of ethics of research, for instance, which doesn't apply only to anthropologists, but it applies in general to anybody who interacts with other human beings or even with the environment at large, other species. So one can be definitely aware of issues of justice or fairness and proper use and so on and so forth, and proper conduct, while at the same time maintain a neutral position from point of view of researcher. And so the cultural anthropologists don't buy that, and I think that's to their detriment, to the detriment of their discipline. Of course, not all of them don't buy it. Right? So there's discussions there. So you're right. That criticism, I think it's fair. I think it has marked anthropology, as you say, for a long time, but it has expanded to other branches of the academy, especially within the humanities, over the last 10 or 20 years. I think, a first clear example of that was the famous or infamous science wars of the 1990s between sort of a postmodernist, humanities faculty and on the one hand and the sciences on the other.